Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the 60-second episode of Stories of Service, ordinary people who do extraordinary work. And I'm the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And today we have, once again, another amazing guest, Mr. Tim Dickey. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great, Teresa. Good to talk to you.
Yes, I really can't wait to get into this discussion. This will be another discussion about leadership, about work, about just so many different topics. And it's always nice when I have somebody on like Tim, who I've just connected on LinkedIn with on a number of issues where we found ourselves agreeing on some of the same topics. And a long time ago, he had offered to be a guest on the show. And I have now been able to start back with a regular rhythm of weekly shows. And so I'm just so pleased that we have the chance to connect. So to give you guys a little bit of background about Tim, he enlisted in the United States Navy after high school graduation. His service started in the submarine force, and he ended up supporting deployed special operations units. With multiple shipboard and boots-on-the-ground deployments, he has worked with top, high-performing teams. He served on both active and reserve duty for nearly 25 years until his retirement in 2016, where he learned servant leadership in the crucible, and we'll be talking more about that. He's worked for Carnival Cruise Lines. I'm definitely going to be asking you about that, having just come from a cruise, Verizon, IBM, and now Improving Enterprises. He is a consultant working as a Scrum Master, and we're going to talk about what that means, for an energy sector company. He graduated from Excelsior College, earning a bachelor's degree in science, computer and information systems, and a master's degree in arts with global strategies. And you have already gotten some props here. My friend Oliver says, Tim is the man. I had the pleasure of serving with him, a true scholar and articulate leader.
I love you, man. I really do. And I miss you, by the way.
That's awesome. All right. So the first question that I always ask my guests, especially obviously the ones who have served in the United States military, is where are you from and what inspired you to join the Navy?
All right. So I hail originally from Visalia, California, which is about 45 minutes south of Fresno, right in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley. And what it boiled down to was I looked at my prospects at home, and my parents told me, hey, son, guess what? If you're going to go to college, then you're going to have to figure out a way to pay for it yourself. At which point I went, yeah, I don't think that's going to work out for me. And the truth is that I had it with high school, and a lot of it, and Teresa and I have been talking about this behind the scenes. A lot of it had to do with the high school bullying and even back to elementary school. And I was like, I need a clean break from all of this. And so my dad and I, we shopped around for, at the time, what was the best deal, which actually paid for me to go to college after I left active duty and joined the reserves. So, there was a twofer in there. First and foremost, of course, was, hey, I needed to become the person that I knew I could become outside of the context of where I grew up and the things that I worked through in those early years. And then second, of course, was what does that look like for me as far as future inside or outside of uniform? So I will not lie to anybody. It was not my patriotic duty that I was going after. It was the fact that, hey, there was an incentive, a financial incentive to be able to go back to school at a later date. But I grew to really enjoy what I was doing in uniform as time progressed.
No, I completely get it. It's one of those things where you think that when you're joining the military, you're joining for the super high, serve my country. And you are. I mean, there is that aspect of it. But for so many of us, I feel like it's just something that we're doing because we know that it's going to give us an opportunity that we may not have ever had otherwise. Do you feel that was probably the case with you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. In growing up in a farming community, there was just a handful of paths that you could choose professionally that were going to work well in that particular place. And it wasn't like I was going to aspire to be a lawyer. I mean, I did look at it, but it was one of those where, yeah, there's just these opportunity limits just based on what I understood and knew at the time. And of course, the military opens your eyes to a lot of potential opportunities, which I was amazed. I went, oh my gosh, you guys are going to train me to do something really cool. I like this. It was a great,
Right,
it
right.
was a great hook.
Oh yeah. And then you've had such a great career even in the Navy. You went from submarines and then you went to special operations. How did you make that transition?
It it was actually as the result of being assigned to my first submarine, the USS Archerfish. Back at the time, we were actually a special missions platform. So we did intelligence gathering, and we had SEAL delivery vehicle team too that was permanently attached to us. So by the nature of what we did, I was introduced to the community early on, and I went, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool! This is like the best working with these guys." And
Right.
it was the halo effect, and I
Mhm.
realized I realized that I was never going to be an operator. Yeah, and I was fine with that. I mean, being submarine qualified that's elite in and of itself. I mean, there's not that many people who even aspire to it, and those of us who do probably ought to have our. Oh wait, I did have my head checked. They figured I was sane enough to do the hey. You always want to have one more surface than you do a dive, and
Mhm.
I was able to make a pretty decent short stretch on active duty, almost 7 years at the time, and it taught me a lot about my personal and professional tolerance too, which was I couldn't see myself doing that for 20 consecutive years. I went, this is probably not the level of stress or moreover that operational commitment that especially in the fast attack community, ballistic missile
Mhm.
submarines are a little bit different. But I was like, man, I just can't see myself being at sea for 3 to 5 years. It's not
Mhm.
going to be good for me. And that's where I think a lot of people, even at the time, would have gone, "Well, you're being selfish." No,
No.
you you figure out what's
And
going to work for you.
exactly, and I love what you just said there. That's really profound because there's a lot of people who think like everybody should be a surface warfare officer or we glamorize certain jobs in the military and I'm sure it's like that in the civilian sector too. There's certain positions at Amazon or wherever else that are the glamorous sexy positions that we all want. But when you really know yourself and you know deeply who you are and what you value, sometimes you don't want to be the person, like you said, that goes to sea consecutively for 3 years. And you can still contribute and make a difference, but you're just not going to be in those positions. And what you're doing is just as important.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great segue because this is part of that story arc, which is I figured out I was committed to do 20 years or more, and as a result, I figured out that the best way for me was going to be doing it in the reserve. And when I transitioned off of active duty, went back to college, finished what I had started, you know, years prior, I knew that number one, I had a great interest in an aptitude for computers and electronics, even though I wasn't an electronics technician by training. And I figured I could make a career out of that. And so, while I was still building my career in the military and the reserve side of the house, I was also building a career in the private sector. And and at certain points, they actually intersected along the way. And so when I graduated from college, the first real job I had out of college was being a systems manager for Carnival Cruise Lines on cruise ships. And it was amazing.
Wow.
I was like, you've got a data center on a cruise ship. This is crazy. But you know, submarines prepared me for that because it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, computer systems, you can run them anywhere as long as they stay dry.
So you
And
deployed on the cruises? Like you actually went out to sea and you were one of, oh
yes.
man, how many lines, how many different boats did you go on?
Oh, oh my gosh, I've lost count. I can say easily I worked on a half a dozen different cruise ships, easily, probably more than that. So I'll take a step back. I am a part of history in that I was able to leave the fast attack community and I joined the at the time the PCU Wyoming. So I was part of the commissioning crew on the USS Wyoming SSBN 742, which was monumental. I mean, there, as well as I do, you just those opportunities are few and far between. And then when I joined Carnival, I actually brought the Carnival Pride out of the shipyard from Helsinki, Finland. We were finishing up all of our testing to make sure that the systems were ready by the time we got to Miami. And, so these two great monumental experiences dealing with ships, and the nice thing about being on a cruise ship is you knew you had a defined contract, and it wasn't going to be these long, well, okay. I did end up spending 6 months on the Carnival Fantasy, but that's another. We were short-handed at the time, and so we hadn't hired enough managers, and so it was an extended contract. But usually the contract was 3 to 4 months, so it would be on for the that 4-month period, being off for about a month, and then coming back on, and and so it was a pretty good balance on that rotation. And the nice thing was I could disappear and go travel for a month. And so the neat part of all of this is, and I'm going to give a shout out to my wife, we've been married for 20 years. She met me, and I was already 10 years into my career, combination of active and reserve. So she met me in the middle of all of this, but she was also working on the cruise ships as well, and she was a purser. And so my wife, and a number of people know this. A purser, front desk, hotel operations. So she was a captive audience. You couldn't go anywhere. It was nice. I married up in the world. I will always say that I married up. She's originally from Croatia, and lovely woman. We have 2 beautiful, nearly grown up daughters, and I got the best out of Carnival that I could ever hope for. I met the woman that I intend to spend the rest of my life with.
What a story, Tim. And one thing that people don't know maybe about cruising, if you're not a cruiser like myself, is the fact that you get on these ships and it is an international staff. It is not just Americans, even if you go on an American cruise line. In fact, you're going to find very few Americans. Most of the staff are from other countries. So tell me a little bit about I know this will, I promise it will not be all about cruise ships, but I'm such a fan of cruising. And
Teresa, it is really a unique experiment. And I think about it, and if you really boil it down to, it is, well, it's like serving in joint units, especially international joint units.
Or like what I'm doing at NATO.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And that's, so I became well suited to support joint operations early on, because I was dealing with 120 different nationalities on board cruise ships, and addressing the language barriers. And oh my gosh.
Tell me
a
little bit.
Not everybody speaks English.
No. Tell me some of the things that you learned about some of the different countries. I mean, I just find it so fascinating. One thing that, when you walk on cruise ships, they always have the person's name. And then I love it because they always have the country that they're from. And it's just opens up your world. It's like you're like Morocco, Philippines. I mean, every single person that you meet is from a different country.
It's phenomenal. And I started celebrating Indian Independence Day, which is in August, as a result of a large number of Indian staff members. And a lot of the cooking staff actually for Carnival at the time hailed from India. And so they had these wonderful dishes that they would have out in the crew mess, that they would purposely, create to commemorate their independence from the United Kingdom. So the little things, the cultural celebrations, those significant milestones from their country of origin became a touch point, because as much as we celebrate Independence Day here in the United States, every other country does the same to a certain extent. And as well, it's understanding that while English is the language of business, English is not the most commonly spoken language. And so oftentimes I would have to take a step back, and I would have to check my own understanding and see if I was being frustrated by my lack of, being able to put myself in their shoes, because as a systems manager, you're constantly fixing computer problems. It's that's your life. That's your heart and soul. So there are those occasions where I would walk in and I would think it's one thing. They would show me something entirely different. Then I'd be like, how did that, what did I miss here? Yeah. And so, and my wife could tell you it was deeply frustrating because I was always trying to do the right thing for the right reason, but oftentimes I wasn't prepared for the for the secondary or tertiary conversation that came about, which, hey, my keyboard and mouse aren't working, and oh, by the way, the printer over there is not working, and we're having problems with a copier. I'm not a copier tech. I can work on the
Right,
printer, but I'm not.
right.
But it taught me a lot about the fact that I even now have to go out of my way to understand cultural difference, and that's a huge thing, especially given the past 20 plus years of where the armed forces, the U.S. Armed Forces, have been operating in a joint community, operating in the international community. It works so well because this is actually the way that business gets done today, and
Yes.
so I was starting this path years prior, and I'll never forget it's so thinking back to September 11th. I'm sitting on board the Carnival Triumph, and we are actually in St. Thomas, and I'm watching all of this unfold on the television, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is I couldn't make heads or tails of it. And one of the immediate thoughts I had was, okay, I need to call my command and ask, what the situation is and what do I need to do. And in the meanwhile, the ships themselves were being locked down. We were not allowed to leave the ships in St. Thomas while they were assessing what the threat was from cruise
Wow.
line employees. And so returning to Miami, and ultimately, you know, a certain level, there was a downgrade in the de-escalation of the threat as they were, determining, hey, cruise ships are not a threat vector at this point in time. But even in spite of several weeks where, as a U.S. citizen, I could get off and go about my business, I didn't feel right because the crew, on the other hand, were stuck. And so I looked at it and I went, I'm living this. All right. It's not for me to take advantage of a liberty at this moment. I'm not needed in uniform. My job is here. And how would that look if I'm a part of this crew and I'm going off and doing my own thing and coming back happy? Not a
Yeah.
good look.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And that really does kind of feed into some of the things that I wanted to even ask you about when it comes to leadership, because I think that there are just certain attributes, like you said, setting the example, even when you can get that liberty, do you and why? And I would say, what other leadership attributes did you learn, while not just serving in the military, but serving in your professional life that apply to kind of what you're doing today?
I I'm going to give retired Lieutenant General Keith Huber a lot of credit, and I'll never forget what he said during our onboarding in Afghanistan at CGI 435. He said, one of the things that I endeavor to do is to watch how my staff is working, and oftentimes that means that if I don't necessarily understand what's going on, I need to go ask questions because the people who are doing the work know the work. I don't. So rather than jump to conclusions, I will go and sit with somebody so that I can grasp why they are doing what they're doing, ask questions to be better informed, and then, if need be, you know, give additional guidance or direction. And I thought that was brilliant because Keith was, in my estimation, and of course I didn't see him every single day, the most humble man that I've encountered in a senior leadership role, who was willing to take a step back and go, you know what? Let me ask some questions. Let me gain shared understanding so that if I have to make a decision, if I have to make a choice, or if I have to delegate action to a subordinate member of my staff, I know why I'm doing it before I
Yeah.
actually pull the trigger.
Gosh, it's so true. And I mean, sometimes I just get so frustrated because I've had so many bosses that they just want to do it their way and there's no other way to do it. And it really takes the wind out of your sails sometimes to want to even serve those people, because you just you don't feel like you have any kind of a voice, or you just don't feel empowered. And I think that that just like it kind of feeds into the team dynamics and how that impacts like the behavior of the team if those things aren't there. And so I guess what have you seen in successful teams versus teams that you've worked with that were unsuccessful?
I think a lot of what I witnessed in the special operations community goes right to the core of this. So again, that story arc. I in the reserve, one of the neat things that I had an opportunity to do was to transition to supporting Special Operations Command South down in Homestead, Florida, and that's actually where I met Oliver. We were on staff at the time together, and I saw the value in open communication. I saw the value in setting aside professional assumptions, and looking at it from the standpoint that everybody does have a voice. And in the special operations community, that in and of itself is probably one of the best things that I could take away, which is I've got to set aside my preconceived ideas about what right looks like, my internal biases, the things that I'm carrying with me as a result of past experience, and go, you know what? I don't know enough about what's required here. I need to learn. I need to understand, and moreover, I need to to figure out what that common language is going to be. That's going to bring more unity than division. And as a result of that, and looking at high performing teams more as an outsider, and then subsequently being embedded during my second boots on the ground deployment supporting special operations units, it gave me this glimpse into the very egalitarian nature of the work. And
Mm,
everyone had a say, and especially in these high risk situations, business doesn't have that risk profile, and that is a challenge, by the way, for a lot of us transitioning out of uniform, whether it be active or reserve. We're so used to, hey, there's human life at stake. There's a significant amount of money here that could be lost if we make a suboptimal decision about how we're going to act, how we're going to execute a plan. So, this open conversation about risk, this open conversation about, and I do appreciate the Army in this, courses of action, most likely, least likely, and most
yep.
dangerous. you know,
Yeah.
speaking this language to be very frank,
Yes.
and say,
Hmm.
hey, okay, this is what we know at the time. We've got about 70 to 80% of the information we need in order to make make a call and go forth and take action, and know that we are going to have to adjust as we go
Right.
along. And I think Eisenhower said it best, which is, you know, no plan survives first contact, but planning is essential. You
Right.
know,
You have to go into it with some sort of an idea of how things are going to turn out, and then as you're executing, you have to be prepared for things to go unaccording to the plan, and then you have to adjust on the fly. But you said so much there that just really spoke to me, and the one biggest takeaway that I want to unpack a little further is sort of how everyone has a say and sort of knows what their role is. And I think that that is the best type of team to have, is where people are not necessarily autonomous, but they're able to just execute down a road until they get to a place where they're satisfied with what the results are. And you have to just sometimes even let things play out differently than what you even thought it could be done this way. I mean, I'm going through that right now, even with my job and this and dealing with some people are teleworking, some people aren't. How do I manage that? And it's working better than I thought it would, as long as you have the boundaries in place and the daily check-ins and other things. People want to perform. They want to do well, and they want things to work. They want that flexibility. So they're going to perform to try to continue to have that flexibility. And so it's definitely opened my mind to what is possible as I move forward. And I think that that's kind of what you're saying, is that you've got to give people that ability to make those decisions, right?
Yeah, it really does boil down to that. And I like talking through Daniel Pink's book Drive, where he points to a Federal Reserve study about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And to your point, you can extend a degree of autonomy to anybody on the team. And of course, there comes a point where, due to that process of building and establishing and maintaining trust, you get the flywheel effect. Now, not everybody is trustworthy out the gate, and I will point to Stephen M. R. Covey's The Speed of Trust. And the company I work for, Improving, we actually talk about trust in small group setting. And so we talk about trust behavior and extending smart trust, and doing the qualification and saying, look, you've succeeded on this small thing. Let me scale up. Let me give you something with a greater degree of responsibility. Let's see what sort of results you can get doing it on your own, and then let's tune it up. And we're doing it together. And one of my mentors, Ravi Verma, pointed me to co-active coaching, where we're actually going through the process of co-creating. It's not my idea that's being built out. It's the idea of a team member. So as a leader, I'm going, hey, that sounds great. Now, how do you think we ought to execute that? How do you think we ought to go about building that? And so then it becomes more of a sounding board position. And to your point, and I love what you said, which is the daily check-in. I mean, this is part and parcel to the way I coach in a hybrid environment. It's looking for those opportunities to ask the question, is there anything stopping you from getting your work done today? And if there is, let me know so that I can help remove that
That
blocker or
barrier.
that impediment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's funny, because as a leader, yes, you're accountable for an outcome, but the
Mhm.
team is responsible for delivering it. And so then you're going, look, we all know what we need to do. So you let me know what I need to step up and assist you with doing, that's going to be outside of focusing in on this work and getting it
Mm.
complete.
It's so true. And I think about that too, even in the team that I'm leading currently, is y- getting that fine balance between like the day-to-day monotony jobs, like the jobs that we have to do because they're part of the job, and then the good ideas that the team brings to the table that are going to take a lot of work and a lot of buy-in. But I feel like as a good leader, you have to shepherd those ideas, and you have to do whatever you can to bring them to fruition, because we all need those. We all need those wins and those things that kind of keep us going. So I think that's my next question, because I struggle with that, because I've got a lot of daily tasks and responsibilities that are very thankless and mundane and routine, and everyone has to do them. And then how do you sprinkle in when one of your teammates has this, like in my case, oh my gosh, we should do this media interview with so and so, or we should have this CBS crew go out to the ship, and all great ideas, but they take so much buy-in and so much coordination. And so how do you balance the good ideas that are coming from your team to improve or to make better with the day-to-day grind of the things that you have to get done?
It's about prioritizing the highest value work first. And
Mhm.
this is I have daily conversations with the two teams that I support, and that's the beauty of agile product development, and specifically the Scrum framework. We are constantly assessing what is the highest priority work for today, for today,
For
and so
today.
it alleviates some of that pressure and stress that you're talking about, because you're doing an assessment every single day. What got accomplished? What do we plan on doing today? What are those things that would prevent us from starting something and finishing something, or better yet, picking up where we left off the prior day and getting it finished? And it's a challenge, because I think we're so task oriented that we take on a lot of work and we start a ton of stuff, but we fail to actually finish one thing at a time. And I'll tell you, I've been doing a lot of research on the concept of context switching, which is when you have sustained focus on one thing and you get it to completion, you have that sense of accomplishment. But if you're starting three things and you're trying to move through those three different things, you're losing a ton of efficiency, because your brain has
Mm,
to reset and go, oh, was there even anything related between task A and task B, let alone task A and task C? And and it's carving out those times and saying, look, I just need uninterrupted time. Okay. I'm going to ask that you give me the next hour or the next 45 minutes or whatever that estimate is to finish it, or at least get it to the point where you can go, okay, that's good enough. I've got enough done on this
mm,
to where I know that I can pick up on it tomorrow or the next day and then
mhm.
close the gap on the remaining. And of course, as well as I do, there are a lot of time sensitive stuff pops up. And then that's the conversation
And
of,
it
is
derails your
this,
day.
well, yeah, but oftentimes it leads into a good conversation. I just had one last week. We're trying to close out some stuff on some modeling that we're doing, and I asked the team. I said, specifically the guy who's working on it. I said, hey, how much time do you need? Do you think you could get this all closed out by, say, Friday if you were uninterrupted? Yeah, I could do that. So we had a check in a couple of days later. Hey, how's that going? Well, I'm still not to where I really want to be. Okay, everybody, you got to let him focus on what he
Mhm.
needs to do because we're so close to delivering this
Right.
capability.
Yep.
And
Yep.
as a leader, it's like saying, look, we know what we want to see get done. Every one of
Mhm.
us is going to work on some discrete work. Sometimes we're going to come together and a handful of us are going to be working on stuff that's in common. Understanding when we come together, when we break apart, and asking the intelligent question: have we progressed enough to say that that we're done? It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're done. And as well as I do, developing products. Can we put this in front of the boss and have the boss do the review, give us the feedback, and
Mhm.
know that we're not going to totally upset the boss by giving a 50% or a half baked
Oh,
product.
yeah. Right.
you know,
Oh, yeah, and it's
it,
always a balance of how much you give a boss, like, a fully finished product when you don't know what the expectation is, or do you do what I like to do with my bosses, I like to do kind of routine check-ins of, "Is this here's what we're suggesting. This is our approach." I like to just talk that out
yeah,
in like our morning meeting of what how we're going to approach it, and then start to deliver that product. So let's go back. What is Scrum? I hear about it. A lot of people have it on their LinkedIn profiles. Tell our audience a little bit about what that is and how that works.
Scrum is a framework that helps people do creative work. And it evolved out of a need in the software development community to get away from traditional project management because you can't structure creative work. And whether software engineers want to admit it, they really do have to be creative in how they solve these problems. And so,
Mhm.
the frustration of trying to put in estimates and then meet those estimates and have everything go on a linear path when oftentimes it's human to human conversations that cause different sparks of ingenuity, sparks of innovation to come out. There's this consistent iterative conversation and discussion that goes on that evolves a potential solution. And so Scrum, the co-creators Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland came together with this nice diagram of, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to time box all of this so that we constantly have feedback going on between the team and the people who are actually going to use the software. And what we're finding is that this is evolving into other areas of business as well, whether that be marketing or sales. And it's the intent is to constantly look at the results that we're getting, constantly look at the things that we're
Mm,
building, and
interesting. Yeah.
we're doing it a maximum of 1 month. So it's
Mhm.
experimenting and adapting. So typically teams like to use a 2-week cadence because they want to get that feedback fairly quickly from the people who would use the software or consume the product. And I
Mhm.
I talk about intelligence products. This being one of those things, being able to say, hey, is this good enough? Does this meet your expectations? Are we missing anything? You know, where do you see that we have holes in this? Is this functionally what you were looking for? And having these open and very transparent conversations, using the theory of empiricism, inspection, adaptation, and being transparent about everything. This is what Scrum enables. It, as well as serves as a mirror in an organization. It shows you all of the things that are not working, which is what scares a
Oh, how
lot of
interesting.
companies. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like it's the best and it's the worst. It's the best
Mhm.
in that it provides the guardrails and the guidelines and the safe operating space. It's the worst
Right.
because then it shows the fact that, oh yeah, people are not communicating effectively. We're not having the type of conversations with the folks who are actually going to use what we're trying to build. We're not looking at our own performance and adjusting our own processes to get the best outcomes. You know, it's, and I think this is where a lot of organizations get hung up, which is they expect all this goodness, but it's like you have to look at yourself in the mirror. Do you like what you see? And if you don't, what are those things that you're going to change? And
Right.
moreover, what are the things that you're going to ask each other to change? And
Yeah.
that's scary.
It
It
is.
really, really is.
If I could get rid of one thing in the military, like my number one thing would be death by PowerPoint, hour and a half, hour-long meetings. I just do not understand why everything in the military is meeting, meeting, meeting. I mean, I've listened to so many podcasts about the importance of having white space and how what we I mean, just the way that we deliver information to the boss is it's to me so inefficient, like having a 30-page PowerPoint slide for one decision that could have been a personal conversation between two people. And I'm sure you see that in a lot of the businesses that you go in and consult. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah, we do. And a lot of the companies that we go into have significant business issues. They've been doing things for a certain way for so long that they're going, this is not working and we're losing revenue. And effectively we're on fire. And that
Mhm.
is a forcing function for change and looking for alternative ways of working. By the way, Jeff Sutherland actually served in the Air Force. He was an Air Force officer, so I think maybe out of some of the pain that he experienced, this
Oh,
is how
yeah.
Scrum. It's like, and to your point, the whole death by PowerPoint. One of the things that I try to do, and this is all in that spirit of transparency, is create a self-service environment or a single point of contact that can speak to how the work is progressing. And so it doesn't become that sit around and have 15 people in the room burning $200 an hour per person. And that's the other thing. There is a quantifiable economic impact that I don't think we have assessed in the military when it comes to we the people and the taxpayer dollar, which is
Oh,
if
yeah.
we have all these folks who are sitting for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day in these
Building
briefings.
slides, building briefings. How
Yes.
much time we waste in the military building briefings and going I mean, especially when you're deployed at sea on a carrier. I remember we would have our morning update brief. Then there I mean, you could literally spend if you were in a leadership position, you would spend your entire day in back-to-back meetings with your people just building
Yep.
slides to feed into the next meeting. And nothing really gets done except for by default when you're not at a meeting.
Right.
I've never really understood what it is that we'll be able to do maybe one day to try to change that. We have a lot of impediments with, our technology. Of course, we can't have cell phones in the building, and there's lots of computer systems that could help us that we don't have access to. I think there is a hashtag going around on LinkedIn called "Fix My Computers" hashtag with DoD. I mean, there's some certainly some and I know you're a IT guy yourself, so I'm sure you've heard some of those things. And I really think that there are things that we could be doing when it comes to the way we run our what we call battle rhythm,
Yeah.
to make things a little bit leaner and to take into account some of that feedback. But there's just such a cultural impediment
Yeah.
within the military to stopping that.
Well, and I saw the distinct contrast between the submarine community and the special operations community, and Spec Ops does have fast feedback loops, and
Right.
that and the constraints, as a result of Operation Eagle Claw and the failure there, they were like, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's figure out how to do this safely, effectively, and you know, you know, violence of force. Have surprise be our ally.
What
And
happened
that's
during Eagle Claw, just for people that don't know, if you can
yeah.
summarize?
So Operation Eagle Claw was the attempted hostage rescue of the Americans who unfortunately were in Iran during the revolution in 1979. They were held hostage in the embassy, and we tried to rescue them, and it ended up in a significant loss of life as well as assets in the desert, because there wasn't the coordination, there wasn't the communication. There was a lot of great intention and effort that went into it, but there were things that, because this was really the first joint operation of scale, where units who had never worked together before were trying to come together and make it work. It served as a huge lesson that ultimately ended up in the creation of Special Operations Command, and subsequently some of the subordinate commands after that. So, the lessons learned, should pave the way for a lot of unique approaches to being able to do military operations in a very fast fashion. And I don't want to get into all the details because, of course, that pulls back the curtain on certain classified things that, I still have an NDA for. But, but I saw that juxtaposed to the way that Hyman Rickover ran the submarine force. And I served under a number of officers who were selected by Admiral Rickover, and the rigor that he felt was necessary. And I get it. I mean, running a nuclear reactor is not, it takes such a level of concentration and discipline and understanding of what those boundaries are, that you don't want to risk losing a multi-billion-dollar submarine and all of the crew because you made a bad decision, because you didn't understand what the policy, process, or procedure was associated with running that reactor, or let alone having that unfortunate accident happen on a nuclear weapons capable submarine.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But there was it was like, well, did you follow the directions? I had some stuff that was did you follow the directions? Did you get permission? Did we discuss a deviation from how to do this based on the years of experience that went into writing these directions? Well, no. Okay, there you go. First mistake. we didn't talk about it. You took action on your own, and the outcome wasn't what everybody had expected. And but there's a happy medium between being really flexible versus being so rigid that you can't adapt to an evolving situation. And we've gotten, I think, in the military, oftentimes we've gotten to this point where we just assume that all of the policies, processes, and procedures that are in place are still applicable to the world that we work in today, which is not the case. It's gotten more complicated. It's got more interconnected. We have complex adaptive systems that are oftentimes working against us, that we can't even assess. The butterfly effect of a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil, and how that's going to affect the sailing of an aircraft carrier, halfway around the world in Japan.
Right.
And we're not going to be able to get there, but we have to be able to look at it and go, doctrinally, does this make sense based on what we know of actual threats, or are we just punching at phantoms anymore?
Yeah.
And it's
or are we
a
just
question.
doing what we've always done? And Yeah, I worry about those same kinds of things too. I mean, we are sort of, in my opinion, repeating some of those same things over and over again. In my 26 years, I have seen the way that we work not really adapting, I feel, to the world in which we live today. Because the world in which we live today moves information at a speed that the military just quite frankly cannot with the current technology keep up with.
Yep.
And especially for me as a professional communicator, the ways in which I need to move information is never adaptive or responsive enough to the way information is needed to really put out that service and to provide. I mean, we have wonderful people doing wonderful things, but it's unfortunately it isn't quick enough or adaptive enough. What have you seen in some of the companies that are more on the leading edge and they are doing the things, they are adapting well to technology? What would you say are the some of the key factors that make them more successful than others?
I would I would say that oftentimes they're looking at it from the standpoint of, um, we've got a clean sheet here. What can we do that is a bit of a twist on an existing concept? It's really about the innovation. And I'll give a shameless plug to the event that I attended on Wednesday, which is Code Launch, and it's an accelerator program that partners with startups, where my company is one of the sponsors of it, and we have hackathons. And so we've got teams of software developers who are working with the startup team to get an application or to tackle a technology problem that they're just not capable of doing on their own. And they walk in with the idea, well, what if we try this? Let's see how that
Mhm.
works. And so oftentimes it's stepping away from the traditional thinking, like you mentioned, and going, okay, if we had no impediments, if it weren't impossible, how might this look? How might we solve this problem if we had everything at our disposal? And it's amazing because when you start taking away the constraint of looking at the problem in the immediate and going, this is a blue sky, what sort of things could we do? it, People begin to really open up and become creative. And one of the things that I love is both physical visualization, like my whiteboard behind me, as
Yes.
well as virtual visualization. Using tools like Miro and Mural to put these virtual stickies on the board and get the ideas out of people's heads rather than just talking through it, because then you've got a semi-permanent record of the possible solutions. And this is where I like where the Air Force has gone with a number of their initiatives when it comes to tackling some of the software challenges that they've got internally. They're taking these approaches. They're looking at it from the standpoint of, okay, we we have all the money in the world. How
Mhm.
might we solve this? No, but it's taking the original problem and looking at it from a different perspective, and not assuming that the answer is going to be evident on at first glance, and looking at it and saying, look, there may be a combination of different answers here, and we're going to have to experiment. We're going to have to go back to basic science and
Mhm.
use hypothesis testing to figure out what's going to work, and not be concerned with getting it perfect the first time, but getting it done, so that we have something that we can build on top of. And this is how a lot of these companies evolve these solutions. And what they're trying to do is they're not trying to impose traditional management bureaucracy on top of um, good collaboration and good co-working and being co-creative
Mhm. I
in
love that.
tackling these things. And I
Mhm.
know the DoD is trying to bring some of this in. This is
They are.
actually the reason why DARPA is out in Silicon Valley, is to foster this kind of conversation. Are we being as successful as we ought to be, especially for accountability of our tax dollars? Maybe not. But there are a lot of great technologies, and I'll point out GPS being one of them, that if you think about it, it started with DoD just to figure out where we're all at on the battlefield in the battle
Right.
space. and
Right.
has evolved into a wonderful tool for commercial purposes to help us navigate when we just don't want to print out a hard copy of a map.
Right.
You know?
Right. Oh yeah. And definitely I do believe that sometimes the military is even culturally in terms of certain, societal things like, the don't ask, don't tell and other things. Sometimes we are at the leading edge of some of these issues. And I think that it's definitely a symbiotic relationship between the Department of Defense and the American people, and they both have to be involved with one another. So
Yep.
we need the American people to hold us accountable, and to when they see that the military is making poor decisions, please call us out on the table. Let us know. But then at the same time, when the military can bring something to the masses that, like you said, like that technology, it's being able to share that to the civilian sector. And this kind of gets into another question that I wanted to ask you, because you're probably the first tech guest I've had. So that's why I think this is so cool. I'm not much of a techie person, but I'm learning a lot about creativity and a lot of and people. And there's still so much in your world that impacts a person like me that's in more of a people job. And so I guess my question would be, is for the military who are transitioning and they want to get into the tech world and be in your environment, how should they make that move?
I like what's going on with SkillBridge and being
Mhm.
able to effectively work as an intern before you transition out for a year, and sometimes if a command is willing to support it, longer. Some people have been able to get into SkillBridge at a year and 6 months or even 2 years, and it allows service members to really kind of test drive before they buy. So I'll use the two most common ideas or roles that people gravitate to, which is traditional project management, and where I'm at with product development. And you know if you're naturally inclined to enjoy structure and being able to schedule things out and put together these very well defined and well understood plans, traditional project management is probably the direction that you want to go. Now, it also means that it's not necessarily going to work well in the software space of technology. In the hardware space, it does, and there's some degree of overlap between agile product development and project management. I would not want to try and build a bridge or a data center using agile approaches. It probably would not work out well because we're dealing with the physical world, and
Mhm.
and we know that we've got to deliver physical capability. Software, on the other hand, like I said earlier, is really a creative activity, and so it lends itself to these fast iterative feedback loops to make sure that we're building the right thing as we go along and discovering um, and refining what the needs are along the way.
Mm,
And so, if you're a creative person and like yourself coming out of public affairs, or even like me coming out of the intelligence community in the latter part of my career, it was like, oh my gosh, I want to be able to work in a fairly unrestrained fashion. I want to
sure.
be able to put something on paper and go, does this look right? And go from
Yes.
there.
Right.
And so that's where being in product development and looking at it from the standpoint of business agility and trying to do small experiments and get some working prototypes out and get some paper prototypes too, you know out into the hands of the people who would actually use the stuff is a wonderful thing. And that structure from the traditional project management standpoint, I wouldn't I even at IBM, we were building public cloud while I was there, and we knew we needed to land certain things at a certain time, and so we
Mhm.
would take and walk it back. Okay, backwards plan. We want to be able to go live on such and such date. What do we need to have in place before then? And then of course, where we switched, especially when the pandemic kicked off, was, oh crap, we may not be able to access these countries, or worse, we're in a country which has actually happened, and we got to pull our team back. And now, how do we adjust? And so
Interesting.
we we knew what we needed to do based on the original schedule, but we became very adaptive as the situation changed, and we were having these conversations to say, Do you think you can do this? Do we want to try and start this work and see how that goes for the next, 3 or 4 weeks? And if we're getting the right outcome, do we want to continue? Not knowing, but understanding that as long as we're communicating to our stakeholders, most of them are going to be a little bit more forgiving, for lack of a better way of describing it, or at least understanding, because we're not operating in a vacuum. We're not withholding information. We're trying to give them timely and accurate information because there's a significant amount of financial commitment to this. So, that's one of those where I can see where it's a hybrid, but it's a contextual hybrid, it's a circumstantial hybrid. And so, you know, in the best case scenario, project management has an application, especially when it comes to doing physical things in the IT space. Building servers, building networks, connecting network attached storage, and things of this nature. And in the software space, it does lend itself to be more creative, iterative work with these
Mhm.
fast feedback cycles.
Ah, that's fascinating. You, like I said, you're the first IT computer person I've had on the show, and there's so much I just didn't understand about computer development versus project management, and how basically that must be such a great feeling for a computer programmer who designs a software system and then is able to see the users and people actually using the system that they wrote the code for and they designed. And and I never thought about there's so much creativity that goes into that too, and which and decisions and which ways to go with how to build something like that. So with all the knowledge that you have, and we're coming up at the top of the hour, and I haven't asked you everything I was gonna ask you, but I definitely want to ask you this one because you've just got such a wealth of job experience and knowledge about team building, about leadership, about tech. And so I guess what I want to know is if you could tell your 10 or 15-year-old self something new, what would that be?
And this too shall pass. And that's one of my mom's favorite sayings, especially when I'm going through hard times. Um, it for me, a lot of it is amazing because yeah, one of the things that I've shared more recently, especially in conference talks, is the effect of bullying. So I was bullied as a young kid in elementary school, and it seemed to be a repeated thing growing up. And the the question around, am I ever going to be good enough? Am I ever going to measure up enough? Am I going to get past this? You know, and finally figure out my footing and where I belong, and the type of person I want to be. If I could go back and tell that boy, yes, you will, and it may not look the way that you think it's going to look. Um, I would go back and do that, but I also understand that the pain that's involved in all of this, and now being on the back side of it, and even being bullied as a professional, in the workplace, I do not condone that. I don't support that. I think that we can have um, conversations that are not emotionally charged. I think oftentimes we allow the frustration to build up to a certain point where we lash out at one another, not understanding how damaging that that reaction, rather than the response, a proper adult, a mature response, is going to be. This is where I go back and I go, you're going to go through a lot of things that you would never envision, and people are going to be extremely vicious towards you, but that's okay. You'll get past that. Use those stories to be a better person and to be empathetic to people who are going through similar things, and ultimately make the world better one day, one person at a time.
I love it. Oh my gosh, you're absolutely correct. And it's probably the same advice that I would have given the 10 to 15-year-old Terry back in the day, because, I was bullied quite a bit, as we've discussed, as a child and also as an adult. And really, like you said, all it's done is it's pushed me more into deepening who I am, and bringing more of me to the world and online and through my work. That is impact to the world. And so I think that you're absolutely right. This too shall pass. And these struggles really do make us stronger, and they create the stories that we can use to help others who are facing similar situations. So, Tim, is there anything else that I didn't ask you or anything else you wanted to add?
I'll tell you what, that's actually one of my favorite questions because I do that. I do that for people I interview as well. Um, I just want to thank you, Teresa, because I know that the journey that you're on, um, you're heading into the closure of one chapter and the opening of a new chapter, and I deeply appreciate what you're trying to do, which is to connect people through the process of storytelling, through that process of sharing, and revealing the humanity involved. There's going to always be things that we can relate to because they're common to the human experience, and the fact that you're going the distance now to be able to bring people together, in these one-on-one conversations is so wonderful. And I'm honored. I'm humbled to a great extent because I oftentimes go, well, who am I? But I realize that every one of us, we need to have moments where we can share a little bit about what it is that got us to where we're at today. And I look forward to hearing some of your story. I read about it because we're connected
Mhm.
on LinkedIn, and I know
Yes.
I know some of the feelings that you have, and and just spending some time with you on a Sunday has just been completely wonderful. It's even better than what I had expected. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I really, I love these conversations, and they just they make my week. I get off the calls and I go downstairs and I talk to my husband. I'm like, oh my God, I just had the greatest conversation. And it puts me in such a good mood for my week. And it's been so amazing. And I have no intention of stopping anytime soon. I'll be doing this until I retire and probably long after I do so. And I've got a lot of great podcast mentors to look up to, people I know, people I don't know, who I love, and who have helped guide me in this journey. So I appreciate that. And you're right. We all have really important stories, no matter who we are and what we've been through. And even if we're in the midst of the muck, sometimes I think that's the time to share the story too, because I can tell you when I was in some of those hard times, I would share just a little bit of what was going on. And I'll tell you, it helped me process that experience. And it really brought people closer to me, and it allowed others to maybe get some goodness from it as well. So thank you so much. I will meet you backstage. I'm going to go on full screen for just a moment and close out the show. But thanks a lot, Tim. And I hope you guys please follow Tim on LinkedIn if you have any questions for him. Amazing, amazing man. And thank you very much. And with that, everyone, I'm going on solo layout. Thank you all for watching. I don't know if I'll have one next week because I think next week we have Thanksgiving. I might get a show in or not. I'm not sure, but you'll see it on LinkedIn, or you'll see it being uploaded to the audio over on Buzzsprout. So thank you all for watching. Have an amazing evening, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye now.